Story 1. The Reflection. It was a cold, rainy night, and Hannah was driving back home after a long shift at the hospital. The windshield wipers squeaked in a rhythmic motion as they fought to clear the heavy rain pelting against the glass. The road ahead was barely visible in the downpour, and the dense fog hung low over the landscape like a shroud. After a nerve-wracking drive, Hannah finally reached the old farmhouse she had inherited from her grandmother. The house was weathered and ancient, standing lonely on the outskirts of town. She quickly rushed inside, soaked through her clothes from the rain. As she stepped into the dim living room, her eyes fell upon the antique mirror hanging above the fireplace, a family heirloom that had always made her feel uneasy. The mirror was large, with a tarnished silver frame and a slight crack running along one edge. She had grown used to it over time, but tonight something about it seemed... Hannah sat down on the worn-out couch, her gaze drawn back to the mirror. Something caught her eye. Movement, but it wasn't her reflection. She stared harder, heart pounding, when suddenly she saw it, a figure standing just behind her, a tall, shadowy shape with hollow eyes staring back at her through the glass. She whipped around, but the room was empty. When she turned back to the mirror, the figure was gone. Her breath quickened as she tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was just exhausted from work, but then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw the reflection again. Closer this time, standing directly behind her. Before she could react, the lights flickered and the reflection lunged forward. Hannah screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the sound of the rain, the shadowy figure dragging her into the mirror. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was her own terrified reflection staring back from the other side. Story 2. The Visitor. It was a dark and stormy night, the kind that seemed to stretch on forever. Sarah lived alone in a small cottage surrounded by dense woods, the isolation, something she normally enjoyed. But tonight, the relentless rain and howling wind made the air feel thick with dread. As she sat by the fire, the power flickered and then went out, plunging the house into darkness. Sarah sighed, reaching for the flashlight she kept on the table nearby. As she clicked it on, she heard something outside, soft but unmistakable, a knock on the door. She froze. Who could possibly be out in weather like this? The knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. Sarah cautiously made her way to the front door, the flashlight beam trembling in her hands. She peered through the peephole, but saw nothing except the rain cascading down in torrents. She hesitated, unsure if she should answer. Then the knocking stopped, and there was silence. A tense minute passed. She was about to step away when there was a scraping sound, a soft, almost delicate noise coming from outside the window behind her. Sarah turned slowly, the beam of her flashlight sweeping across the darkened room until it landed on the window. Through the rain, slicked glass, she could make out the faint outline of a figure, a man, his face pale and gaunt, staring directly at her with wide, unblinking eyes. Her heart raced as she backed away. She could see the man's mouth moving, as though he was whispering something, but she couldn't hear it over the storm. She swallowed hard and stepped closer, pressing her ear to the glass to hear what he was saying. "Let me in." The voice was soft, barely audible, but filled with an eerie calm. She recoiled, shaking her head, and turned to run. But before she could move, the window shattered, glass flying everywhere. Sarah screamed and fell to the ground, clutching her flashlight as the figure climbed through the broken window, his body impossibly thin and tall, moving with unnatural grace. She scrambled to her feet and ran towards the back door, but as she reached for the handle, she felt a cold hand close around her wrist. She gasped in horror as she was yanked backward into the darkness. The last sound she heard before everything went black was the man's soft whisper. Story 3. The Old Man on the Road. It was another late shift for Mark, driving home on a rainy night. The rain was relentless, hammering down on his car roof and flooding the narrow country road ahead of him. Mark hated this stretch of road, especially at night. It was isolated, The trees lining the sides seemed to close in on him, and the fog always seemed thicker here, suffocating. As he rounded a sharp bend, his headlights cut through the mist and illuminated something up ahead. An old man standing by the side of the road. He was soaked to the bone, his clothes hanging off him like rags. He was hunched over, leaning on a walking stick, his face obscured by the shadow of his hood. Mark slowed the car and pulled over cautiously. No one else was out here, and the man looked like he needed help. Rolling down his window, he called out, "Hey, are you all right? Do you need a ride? Do you need a ride?" The old man didn't respond at first, just stood there, unmoving. Then slowly, he lifted his head and looked at Mark. His face was gaunt and pale, his eyes black pits that seemed to absorb the light. Mark's heart skipped a beat. Something was wrong, but before he could react, the old man nodded and began to shuffle toward the passenger door. Against his better judgment, Mark unlocked the door, trying to push down the growing sense of dread in his gut. The old man climbed in silently, water pooling in the seat beneath him. He didn't speak as Mark started driving again, but Mark could feel his eyes on him, even though the old man's head never moved. "Where are you headed?" Mark asked after a few minutes of tense silence. No answer. Mark glanced over, but the seat was empty. The passenger door was closed and the seatbelt still dangled loosely at its side, as if no one had ever been there. His heart pounded in his chest as he slammed on the brakes, his car skidding slightly on the slick road. He turned in his seat, eyes darting across the empty interior, searching for any sign of the old man. Nothing. No water stains, no footprints, just the quiet hum of the car's engine and the soft patter of rain. Shaken, Mark gripped the wheel and decided to keep going. He must have imagined it. Maybe he was just tired. He pressed on through the storm, trying to shake the eerie feeling that clung to him. But as he neared his house, his headlights caught movement on the side of the road again. There, standing in the exact same spot as before, was the old man, staring at him with those empty eyes. Mark's blood ran cold. He slammed the gas and sped past, not daring to look back. When he reached his driveway and bolted from the car, he glanced over his shoulder one last time. The road was empty. The rain had lessened to a drizzle. But he knew, somewhere out there, that old man was still waiting. Story 4. The Child at the Window. The rain was falling hard against the windows of the old farmhouse. Liz had always loved rainy nights. They were soothing, a break from the noise of everyday life. But tonight, something felt different. The wind howled through the cracks in the walls, making the house groan as if it were alive. She was curled up on the couch, sipping tea and reading a novel, trying to ignore the eerie feeling creeping up her spine. It was late, well past midnight, and the storm outside seemed to be getting worse. The lightning flashed in quick succession, illuminating the dark corners of the house. Then, a knock, faint at first but unmistakable. Liz froze. She lived alone in the middle of nowhere. No one should be out here at this hour, especially not in this storm. The knock came again, louder this time, and she stood up, heart racing. Slowly, she made her way to the front door. She hesitated, pressing her ear against the wood, listening for any sound on the other side. "Please, let me in." A child's voice, barely audible over the rain. Liz felt a pang of sympathy. Who would leave a child out in this weather? She opened the door a crack and peered outside. The little girl stood on her porch, drenched from head to toe. Her hair clung to her face and her eyes were wide, pleading. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, her pale skin almost glowing in the dim light. Liz's instincts told her something was off, but she couldn't just leave the girl out in the storm. "Come in," Liz said, pulling the door open wider. The girl stepped inside without a word, dripping water onto the floor. Liz grabbed a towel from the bathroom and wrapped it around her. "Where are your parents?" Liz asked gently. "Are you lost?" The girl didn't respond. She just stood there staring at Liz with those wide eyes, Her lips curled into a faint smile that made Liz's skin crawl. Liz started to feel uneasy, but she couldn't put her finger on why. "Why were you outside alone?" Liz asked again, her voice trembling slightly. The girl finally spoke, her voice cold and emotionless. "I wasn't alone. He's with me." Liz's blood ran cold. "Who's with you?" she asked, taking a step back. The girl's smile widened, and she slowly turned her head towards the window. Liz followed her gaze and froze. Standing outside in the rain, just beyond the window, was a tall, shadowy figure. Its face was obscured by the darkness, but she could feel its gaze locked on her. Panicking, Liz turned to the girl, but she was gone. The towel lay in a crumpled heap on the floor where the child had been standing. The room was eerily silent, the storm outside seeming to fade into the background. Liz backed away, her heart hammering in her chest. She glanced out the window again, but the figure was gone, as if it had never been there. Shaking, she locked all the doors and windows, trying to reassure herself it had been her imagination. But when she finally returned to the living room, she found the child's wet footprints leading straight to her bedroom. And in the dark, Liz could hear a soft, almost imperceptible whisper, "Let me in." Story 5. The Cries in the Attic. On a dark, stormy night, Clara lay in bed, listening to the thunder rumbling overhead. The rain beat down relentlessly on the roof of her century-old house, creating a constant drumming that normally would have lulled her to sleep, but tonight something felt off. She had lived in this house for 3 months, ever since she inherited it from a distant relative. The place was charming but warm. Old floorboards creaked underfoot, and the walls whispered with the memories of a past she knew nothing about. Still, it had been peaceful, until recently. For the past week, Clara had started hearing strange noises coming from the attic. Soft rustling at first, as if something, or someone, was moving around up there. She told herself it was just mice or maybe a raccoon that had somehow gotten inside, but the sounds were becoming more distinct. Last night, she swore she heard faint crying, a child's sobs, coming from directly above her bedroom. Tonight, the sound was louder, more persistent. Clara lay still, heart pounding in her chest, trying to convince herself it was just the storm playing tricks on her mind. But the cries continued, clearer now, soft, pitiful, echoing through the house. She couldn't ignore it any longer. Grabbing her flashlight, she threw on a sweater and slowly made her way up the creaky staircase to the attic. Each step felt heavier than the last as dread settled deep in her stomach. When she reached the door to the attic, she hesitated. The crying had stopped. Clara stood there, hand hovering over the doorknob, questioning her sanity. But she had to know. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The attic was dark, save for the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the room in brief, ghostly bursts. Dust swirled in the air as she stepped inside, her flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. She scanned the room. Old furniture covered in sheets, forgotten trunks, and broken toys. Everything was still. But then she saw it. In the far corner of the attic, huddled between a stack of old boxes, was a small figure. Clara's breath caught in her throat. It was a little boy, no more than 6 or 7 years old, with dark hair plastered to his face and tear-streaked cheeks. He was wearing old-fashioned clothes, and his eyes were wide with fear. "Are you okay?" Clara stammered, her voice shaky as she took a step closer. The boy looked up at her, his lips trembling. "Help me," he whispered. Clara's heart ached with sympathy. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" she asked, inching forward. Suddenly, the boy's expression shifted. His eyes darkened, his mouth twisting into a menacing grin. His voice deepened, unnatural, and filled with malice. "He's coming for you." The attic door slammed shut behind Clara, plunging the room into complete darkness. The flashlight flickered, then died. The temperature dropped sharply, her breath visible in the icy air. She fumbled for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The sound of footsteps echoed through the attic, heavy and deliberate. getting closer and closer. Clara pressed her back against the door, heart racing as she felt something cold brush against her cheek. In the blackness, she heard the boy's voice again, closer now, so close it sounded like it was coming from right next to her ear. He's here. Story 6. The Phantom Passenger. Jacob was a long-haul truck driver, accustomed to long nights on the road. He preferred the quiet that came with driving through desolate stretches of highway in the dead of night, with only the sound of the rain and his truck's engine for company. But there were certain places he avoided, places where strange things were known to happen. One of those places was Route 89, a winding road that cut through dense forests and mountains. It was said that Route 89 was haunted by the spirits of those who had died in tragic accidents along the road. Jacob had heard stories from other truckers, stories of ghostly hitchhikers, phantom cars that appeared out of nowhere, and strange figures that vanished into thin air, but he had never believed them, not until that night. It was raining hard, and the fog was thick as Jacob made his way down Route 89. The windshield wipers struggled to keep up with the downpour, and visibility was almost zero. Jacob kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the wheel, when suddenly a figure appeared out of the fog on the side of the road. It was a woman, drenched from head to toe, her dark hair hanging limply around her face. She wore a long, tattered coat, and she stood still, her thumb out in the universal gesture of someone looking for a ride. Against his better judgment, Jacob slowed down and pulled over. The woman approached the truck, her face obscured by the shadows. He rolled down the window, rain instantly splashing inside. "Do you need a ride?" he asked, trying to sound calm. The woman nodded silently and climbed into the passenger seat. Jacob tried to get a good look at her face, but she kept her head turned away, staring out the window. Her presence felt strange, cold, almost oppressive, but Jacob shook off the unease. It was just the rain, he told himself, just the long hours. They drove in silence for miles, the woman not uttering a single word. Jacob's skin prickled with discomfort, but he didn't know how to break the silence. Finally, he spoke. "Where are you headed?" The woman slowly turned her head toward him, her face finally visible. Jacob felt his heart drop into his stomach. Her eyes were hollow, black voids, and her skin was pale as death. A chilling smile crept across her lips. "I'm already home," she whispered. Suddenly, the truck's engine sputtered and died. The headlights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Jacob's heart raced as he frantically tried to restart the engine, but it was dead. He turned to look at the passenger seat, but the woman was gone. Panic surged through him as he searched the empty cabin, the rain hammering against the truck's roof like an ominous drumbeat. He glanced out the window, expecting to see her standing outside, but there was nothing, just the fog and the rain closing in around him. After what felt like an eternity, the truck's engine roared back to life on its own. The lights flickered back on, and Jacob hit the gas, speeding away from the spot as fast as he could. But no matter how far he drove, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was still with him. In the rearview mirror, for just a split second, Jacob saw her again, sitting in the back seat, smiling. Story 7. The Whispering Tree. It was a stormy night when Eric first heard the whispers. His family's farmhouse was nestled deep in the countryside, surrounded by acres of forest. They had lived there for generations, and nothing strange had ever happened. Until the night of the storm. The rain battered against the windows as Eric sat alone in the living room, the lights flickering every so often. The rest of his family had gone to bed early, but Eric couldn't sleep. He felt restless, a strange unease gnawing at him. The wind howled outside, making the old house creak, but beneath the wind, Eric thought he heard something else. A soft whisper, barely audible. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but then it came again, faint but unmistakable. The sound seemed to be coming from outside. Curiosity getting the better of him, Eric grabbed a flashlight and headed out into the rain. The wind whipped through the trees as he made his way toward the old oak tree that stood at the edge of the property. It had been there for as long as anyone could remember, its twisted branches stretching towards the sky like skeletal arms. As Eric approached the tree, the whispers grew louder. He shined his flashlight up into the branches, expecting to see something, anything, that could explain the noise. But there was nothing, just the wind rustling the leaves. And then, as he stepped closer, the whispers suddenly stopped. Eric stood there in the rain, his heart pounding, staring up at the tree. The silence was thick and oppressive, broken only by the occasional rumble of thunder in the distance. Just as he was about to turn and head back to the house, he felt something cold brush against his arm. He looked down and saw nothing, but then, from the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of movement. He turned the flashlight towards the base of the tree, and his blood ran cold. Carved into the bark were hundreds of names. Names he didn't recognize, all scratched deeply into the wood. But as his flashlight swept over the trunk, he realized something chilling. His own name was there, freshly carved into the tree, as though someone had just finished writing it. Before Eric could react, the whispers returned, louder this time. The voices seemed to come from all around him, swirling in air like the wind itself. He stumbled backward, trying to get away from the tree, but his foot caught on something and he fell hard to the ground. When he looked up, the tree's branches seemed to be reaching for him, twisting and writhing like they were alive. He scrambled to his feet and ran back to the house, not daring to look back. That night, Eric didn't sleep. The whispers continued, soft and insistent, seeping through the walls of the house. And every time he closed his eyes, he saw the names carved into the tree, names that hadn't been there before. The next morning, Eric went to check the tree in the daylight, but the carvings were gone. No names, no scratches. Just the old oak standing silently as it always had. But Eric knew better. From that night on, whenever the wind howled through the forest, Eric would hear the whispers calling his name, and each time, the pull to return to the tree grew stronger. Story 8. The Forgotten Room. Memmon had always been fascinated by old houses, which is why she jumped at the opportunity to buy a Victorian era home at a fraction of the price. The house was beautiful, with high ceilings, stained glass windows, and intricate woodwork. It had been abandoned for years, but Megan saw its potential. She spent weeks fixing it up, cleaning away the dust and cobwebs and bringing the place back to life. Everything was going smoothly, until she found the hidden door. It was on a rainy night while she was inspecting the attic for leaks that she noticed something strange. One of the walls didn't quite match the others. Curious, Megan tapped on the wood, and it gave way slightly, revealing a small hidden door that had been painted over. Megan's heart raced with excitement. She had heard of secret rooms in old houses but had never expected to find one in hers. She grabbed a flashlight and pried the door open, revealing a narrow staircase that led down into darkness. At first, she hesitated, but her curiosity won out, and she carefully made her way down the stairs. The air was musty, thick with the scent of decay, and the narrow passageway felt like it hadn't been disturbed in decades. As she reached the bottom, her flashlight illuminated a small, forgotten room. The room was filled with old furniture covered in sheets, and a thick layer of dust coated everything. But what caught Megan's attention was the small bed in the corner. The bed was made up neatly, as though someone had left it recently, even though the room clearly hadn't been touched in years. On the nightstand next to the bed was a doll. It was old. Its porcelain face cracked and its clothes faded with time. Megan shivered as she picked it up, a strange sense of unease settling over her. She felt like she was intruding on something that should have been left undisturbed. Suddenly, the door at the top of the stairs slammed shut. Megan jumped, dropping the doll. The air around her grew colder, and she could hear the faint sound of a child's laughter echoing through the room. Her heart pounded in her chest as she raced back up the stairs, only to find the door locked from the outside. Panic set in as she banged on the door, shouting for help. But the only response was the soft, eerie laughter that seemed to come from all around her. Then she heard it. A voice, soft and sad, whispering in her ear. "Why did you leave me?" Megan froze, her blood turning to ice. She turned around slowly, her flashlight flickering, and saw the doll lying on the floor where she had dropped it. But now it was standing upright, its cracked face turned toward her, its glass eyes gleaming in the dim light. And behind the doll, barely visible in the shadows, was the figure of a little girl. Her dress was old, fashioned, her hair long and matted, and her eyes were filled with a sorrow so deep it made Megan's heart ache. "You left me here," the girl whispered, stepping closer. "You forgot me." Megan backed away, her breath coming in short gasps. "I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. But the girl only smiled, a twisted, ghostly grin. "You will." The flashlight flickered once more, and then everything went dark. The last thing Megan felt was a cold hand wrapping around her wrist, pulling her back down into the darkness of the forgotten room. Story 9. The Haunting of Room 213. Adam had never believed in ghosts. He was a skeptic through and through, always finding logical explanations for strange occurrences. But that changed when he spent the night in room 213 of the old roadside motel. It was a small, unassuming place on the edge of town, the kind of place travelers stopped at when they were too tired to keep driving. Adam had been on the road for hours, the rain coming down in sheets, and he needed a place to sleep for the night. The neon sign outside the motel flickered as he pulled into the parking lot, and the clerk at the front desk handed him the key to room 213 with a knowing look. "Sleep well," the clerk said, but there was something in his tone that made Adam uneasy. Room 213 was at the far end of the hall, its door creaking as Adam pushed it open. The room was outdated, old floral wallpaper, a lumpy bed, and a TV that looked like it hadn't worked in years. But it was dry and warm, and that was all Adam cared about. As he settled into bed, the sound of the rain pounding against the window was oddly soothing. He had just started to drift off when he heard it. A faint knocking sound, like someone tapping on the wall. Adam sat up, listening intently. The knocking continued, slow and rhythmic, coming from the wall behind the bed. He shook his head, annoyed. It was probably just the pipes or the wind rattling something loose. He lay back down trying to ignore it, but the knocking grew louder, more insistent, and then it was accompanied by a voice, soft and distant. "Let me out." Adam's heart skipped a beat. He sat up again, his eyes scanning the room. The voice was coming from the wall, clear as day. "Let me out," it repeated, a woman's voice filled with desperation. Adam stood, his pulse racing, and approached the wall. He pressed his ear against it, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. "Who's there?" he called out, but there was no response. Suddenly, the knocking stopped. The room fell silent except for the rain outside. Adam let out a shaky breath, convinced that he must be imagining things. But then the TV, which had been off, flickered to life. Static filled the screen, and Adam watched in horror as a face slowly emerged from the snow. The face of a woman, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth moving as though she was screaming. "Help me," the woman on the screen mouthed, her hand reaching out as though trying to break through the glass. Adam stumbled back, his heart racing. He grabbed his bag and ran for the door, but as he reached for the handle, it wouldn't budge. He yanked and pulled, but the door remained firmly.